Oh, and if you could just like snap right at the mic for me.
I'm Moen Silverman Andrews. I'm active with Baltimore Palestine Solidarity and Jewish Voice for Peace Baltimore chapter. I'm really glad to be joined by the two of you. Would you please introduce yourselves?
Sure, thank you for having me. I'm Dr. Margaret Flowers. I'm a pediatrician by training. I've lived in Baltimore for almost 30 years now, and I've been doing advocacy work for about the past decade full time. I run an organization called Popular Resistance, and I'm running for U.S. Senate on the Green Party ticket for Barbara Mikulski's open seat.
Great.
Hi, Owen, thanks for having us here. My name is Miles Honig. I'm running for Congress, 7th District in Maryland, on the Green Party ticket. I'm a high school teacher. I'm a veteran teacher. I've been in Baltimore most of my 60 years. I have been very active in JVP, Jewish Voices for Peace, and a lot of issues that are both local and national on issues of social justice. And I'm really happy to be here talking to you, to the two of you all.
Great. Well, let's talk a little bit, first of all, about what the Green Party is. How do you identify as a Green? How did you come to that identification? What was your personal journey to becoming not only a candidate, but also a Green?
Well, to me, it's, as part of our work through Popular Resistance, we follow a two-path approach, which is to stop the things that are harmful, so the protesting, the things that we need to stop, and creating alternatives. And clearly, when we look at our political system, we have a plutocratic system with two major parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. When it comes to foreign and economic policy, they're pretty similar in their approach. They're both very neoliberal, and so we have to build an alternative outside of that doesn't take corporate dollars, that stands for justice, for democratic, more participatory democratic values, for more cooperative values, and those are very much in line with who I am as an individual, so it's just natural for me. And I think that this is the time. More and more people are fed up. They're seeing that the two major parties are failing them, and so we have an opportunity to build this necessary alternative.
Mm.
I think it's really important to see that the two parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, really represent the capitalist parties. And that's something that I feel that the Green Party really needs to break out of that mold and show the rest of the population that there is an alternative, something that people know in their hearts, they know in their minds that there are other ways, but they're only conditioned to see the two that are out there, the Democrat and Republican, which is still pretty much the same. So it's our opportunity to break that mold and to expose to everyone just what is the real problems and, more importantly, what are the solutions that we feel we have to offer that are a green solution.
And that's interesting because I think when we talk about the lack of difference between the two main parties, you could argue that on the domestic front, the Democrats kind of put up a feeble defense against a decaying skeletal social safety net, and the Republicans chip away at it, although, to what extent are they actually defending it or trying to expand it even is questionable. But on foreign policy, I think it's especially true that the two parties have very, very similar foreign policy, and nowhere is that really more evident than in Israel, Palestine, and the Middle East more generally. But let's kind of start global foreign policy and kind of work our way in towards Israel, Palestine. Where do you see the Democrats and the Republicans at in terms of global foreign policy, and how is the Green Party different? How is your candidacy different?
Sure. So, one thing that we don't talk about enough in this country is the fact that we are the largest empire in the history of the world. We've actually moved beyond just being a military empire to being, there's kind of this transnational capital, empire as well. So we dominate countries both economically and militarily, and whichever kind of suits our purposes the best. But just looking at the military, arm, it's interesting when you look at popular uprisings around the world and that we follow them on Popular Resistance. The first question we have to ask ourselves is this an actual popular uprising, or is this a U.S. funded, like if you look at Ukraine. So it's really the U.S. has a foreign policy of domination, whether overtly or covertly, of being, aggressive militarily. And we just can't sustain this. We have over 1,000 bases and outposts around the world. if you talk about environmentally and the climate crisis, we're just really, our military is one of the biggest polluters. And so these run, very counter to the Green Party values, which are much more, as I said, about cooperation, about sustainable solutions. And so we very much would put forth a more diplomatic, cooperative policy, which other countries have actually been seeking, and we support those efforts.
And Margaret, I want to stay with you for one moment. You said that the U.S. has kind of transitioned away from the old style of empire of occupying and colonizing the land and making it part of an empire into this new corporate form of empire, although the U.S. does have military bases around the world. Could you talk specifically about that and kind of your work and Popular Resistance's work with the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Well, if you look at, the global economy and institutions like the International Monetary Fund, like the World Bank, you see that the U.S. heavily dominates these institutions, and we use them to further the interests of, multinational corporations, which take land, they take resources, they exploit people, they push people, off of their land, and so it's kind of like a neo-colonialism, maybe you could call it, And you mentioned the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership and the Trade and Services Agreement are 3 international treaties being negotiated right now, which will fundamentally alter our global governance system, empower corporations to sue our governments if our laws interfere with their profits. And it's really, moving us in a direction that it's interesting. The World Economic Forum put together this platform, and it's the Global Redesign Initiative, and it really is about phasing out nation states and empowering corporations, because they see nation states as clunky and obsolete, but transnational corporations are so efficient. And so this is kind of the direction that we're going unless we do something about that.
Miles, I want to ask you a little bit about the U.S.'s foreign policy history, where we are in this particular moment, and where you see us going, both if we do make a change in our political structure and shake up the two-party state, and if we don't. And so we've got a book here actually by former President Jimmy Carter. If you were to make any kind of argument that any president has even attempted to break with the foreign policy of empire, you maybe could say that it was Jimmy Carter, although really the State Department is a bureaucratic machine, and those bureaucrats don't change with institutions except for at the very top. But talk about the history of U.S. foreign policy, especially since Carter, over the last 3 or 4 decades, and how we got to the point where we find ourselves in now.
Sure. Our foreign policy has been extremely anti-democratic from the beginning, but especially since President Carter. Even in this administration, you have President Obama, who one of his first actions abroad was to help overthrow the government of Honduras. They wanted to raise the minimum wage. Our American companies didn't approve, so we brought in a military dictator. And people don't even realize that that's the case. I do teach ESL students, and many of my students are from Honduras. And many of them came because they were fleeing the turmoil, the bloodshed that is endemic in that country and other parts of Latin America. Our foreign policy, if you look at Ukraine, which I had looked at very closely, we have brought in, I won't say the entire government is Nazi and fascist. Most of it is fascist. A lot of Nazis from those that were involved in the murders in 1943 are the ones who are in power today. They're descendants. The right sector, I believe it is. They have leadership positions in the military, in the police forces of Ukraine. The Russians are in, they are helping their own citizens, and the U.S. sees that as interference, and it is they who are the anti-democratic people, at least in our eyes, when the reality is it is the United States that has created an incredibly undemocratic situation in Ukraine. It's happening all over the world. Wherever the U.S. goes, it's a corporate anti-democratic empire, as Margaret's talking about, and that's something that the Greens see as it needs to stop. We need to really turn it around. We really need to present a different point of view that shows that the people can, from within, have a say in their own government, have an own voice, and they just don't have it now. As long as American corporations dictate, not just abroad, but here in the United States, they write the legislation, they do the lobbying, they write the legislation, and boom, that's the law. We have to break that.
Right, right. Well, let's zoom in a little bit and let's look at the history of the Middle East. You know, we've talked about anti-democratic foreign policy in Latin America, in Europe. Of course, we could talk about Asia and Africa as well, but let's zoom in a little bit on the Middle East. And Margaret, especially starting with Bill Clinton and moving to the point where we could have another Clinton in the White House if something doesn't change. What's been wrong with our foreign policy in the Middle East?
Well, I think, if you look, I mean, this could be a very long discussion, to be honest.
Unfortunately, yeah.
But if we let's look at just Israel as, a focal point, because I think that that's really a central issue. It's something that we need to change in a huge way. So the United States, in terms of our military funding for other countries, we give a higher percentage to Israel than we do to other countries. And they're demanding more, it's not enough. And what are we basically doing? We're giving them the tools to destroy the Palestinians. It's really genocide against them. It's not just apartheid, which it is, but it's also a genocide against the Palestinians. It's very blatant. And if you look at Israel, I mean, it's a rogue nation, as in many ways when it comes to foreign policy, the United States is as well. And so I look at the U.S. and Israel, particularly on the UN Security Council. They're like the bullies who stand against. You have so many other countries that are putting forth these reasonable solutions, and then Israel and the U.S. stand together and block them. And so I think that's really got to stop. We've got, we're one of, I think it's really only the U.S. and Israel that don't recognize Palestine as a nation. So we need to recognize them. We need to stop giving the military funding to Israel. It's it's destabilizing that whole region, and Saudi Arabia, our other close ally, are really creating instability. So I think that we need to respect the self-determination and human rights of all people in those countries. We've created such a mess over there, and throwing more weapons and more money into it is just making it worse.
Right, and as a doctor, as in do no harm, you're the first principle, and we've done so much harm that when people say, "Oh, well, what's the solution?" Sometimes that could be the default position of, "Well, stop the bleeding," and then it'll become clear what the next step is.
Or let them heal. We just keep causing more damage, and we never give them the opportunity. Like we were talking today about ISIS and how, now we're going to stamp out ISIS. We're not going to stamp out ISIS if we continue to bomb countries, if we continue to drone countries. It's just going to evolve into something else. As long as we have the terroristic policy that we have, we just keep creating this. And sometimes you have to step back and allow there to become some reestablishment of equilibrium. If we allow countries to have the ability to do that instead of interfering so much,
Right. And Miles, I just read a quote from Malala, the Pakistani Nobel Peace Prize winner, and she said, "With a gun, you can kill terrorists, but with
education, you can kill terrorism."
Right. And so what is the education that we as Marylanders, as residents of the 7th District, need to do to better understand what is actually happening there? Because there's so much propaganda.
And also many of us that are Jewish. We have to know the real history. We have to know about the formation of Israel. How did it start? What were the consequences of the taking of the land? What was the percent of the land that was owned by Palestinians, and what is the percent that is owned today? Who was it that gave the land to the Zionist settlers in Israel? The argument would be, it was given to them by the Lord. The only Lord that gave it to them was Lord Balfour. It was a colonial outpost for Britain, and it served them very, very well. the land has been taken, has been stolen. Growing up, I remember we used to put those coins in the pushkin. I can still see that little metal can. Never realized that what that meant was it was to grow forests, trees in a desert. We didn't know at the time that those trees were covering up Palestinian villages as part of the ethnic cleansing, a way of hiding the history of the people that were there. That's something that the American people, and the Jewish American people especially, really have to have a better education of the origins of Israel and Zionism itself, going back not just with Herzl, but bring it a little bit more closer to the 1948-47 time period.
Mm-hmm. And Miles, you grew up in Northwest Baltimore?
Northwest Baltimore, yeah.
So, kind of building off of that.
How am I the black sheep of the...
Right. I mean, so, in Northwest Baltimore City and moving out into the county, there's really a powerful, very conservative Jewish political machine, especially on foreign policy, but even in terms of domestic policy and minimum wage and things like that, death penalty. Right. So talk a little bit about how that power machine operates and its relationship with the Elijah Cummings and Ben Cardin, obviously.
Well, Baltimore has always been a very segregated city, and the Northwest Corridor, starting from probably the Forest Park area, heading northwestward and into the county, has been where the migration of the Jewish population started and then continued. There have been Jewish machines. You have the Kovens machine that helped put Marvin Mandel into the governor's house. It has been a very established machine. It's whittling away now because the population has left Baltimore and has kind of dispersed out. But it has always been quite cohesive in its politics. It has always voted Democratic for the most part. It has always been liberal on social issues, but not that far. Mm-hmm. And of course, on Israel, there is no other issue but protecting Israel. Bottom line, Israel is it's just part of the 7th District, as well as the Northwest Corridor of Baltimore. Mm-hmm. Everything that regards Israel is sacrosanct. There is no way that you can say or do anything that would oppose it. When we have demonstrations in front of the synagogues, the shuls on Park Heights Avenue, the kind of animosity that comes from the people driving in. When we were protesting at the JCC in Owens Mills, it was pretty vicious, a lot of the comments directed at us. We expected that. I don't know if they will really truly change, and unless there's a true understanding of the real history of what was going on. Mm-hmm. It may not change them, but it may lessen their animosity towards us, mm-hmm. towards Palestinian resistance, and we don't know where it'll go.
Right.
I see so many connections, in terms of the understanding the real history. I mean, one thing is that it's really important for people to understand that when we talk about and criticize Israel, that Israel is not the Jewish religion. We're not criticizing Jewish people. Mm-hmm. Similarly, when we look at, I'm a European American, our history in the United States is also a very bloody and awful history. Mm-hmm. I mean, we funded the founding of this country based on stealing land and resources from the people who lived here. And so we need to recognize that history as well and start to come to terms with that. Similarly, people that live in Israel need to start to come to terms with that history, which displaced so many hundreds of thousands of people and killed others in order to establish Israel as a nation. So, so there are just like so many connections to, kind of the issue of slavery in this country, the history of Native American genocide, Palestinian genocide.
Mm-hmm. And also the history of reparations in America for descendants of the slaves. That's an issue as well. It's paying back those that have suffered under Western American imperialism. Mm-hmm. kind of what it's all bringing it back to.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at a map of Baltimore over time in terms of neighborhoods and the per capita income, it's really very clear that we've been investing in the white neighborhoods and their community wealth is growing, and we have not been investing in the majority black neighborhoods. And we have, Old Town, which is one community in Baltimore between the Hopkins Hospital Center and the jails, their per capita income is maybe $7,000 a year. And, they have 80% of the adult males in that community are unemployed. And, meanwhile, we have the whole harbor moving up that direction and trying to encroach that. And so, and these are, in Baltimore, of course, is the home of redlining and unfair bank practices. Still, mortgages are overwhelmingly given to whites in this city. So there's just,
Right. It is a national issue because
Right.
for example, after World War II, there was the veterans' rights, the bills that helped veterans. A lot of that money was directed to the trade unions to help returning soldiers, but the trade unions were notoriously racist, and they would not employ the black veterans. So it really still put the black veterans in no better position than when before they entered the military. The whole red line issue, state, local, and federal law restricted blacks from owning homes in certain neighborhoods. It was written in law. So it is endemic. It is a systemic problem, not just in Baltimore, but it is a national issue.
Yeah, I mean, if you looked at Sparrows Point, back when it was open, the undesirable jobs went to the blacks and the more desirable jobs went to the white. It was pretty
Right.
clear.
Right. Miles, I want to ask you a little bit about the current incumbent in the 7th District,
Yes.
Congressman Elijah Cummings. Recently he voted in favor of the president's Iran deal, nuclear disarmament deal, and made the claim that this was a sign that he was not in the pocket of pro-Israel forces in his district and nationally. But when you dig a little bit deeper, you see that there's a nonprofit that bears his name called the Elijah Cummings Youth Program, which takes high school students from the 7th District and sends them to Israel. And so could you talk a little
There's
bit
also, I
about
believe,
that?
a lot of military training, a lot of military scholarship that Cummings has been involved in. Every time I've had to call his office to get him to vote one way or another, I knew he was always going to vote the way that I wanted him to vote. It was almost like a wasted phone call. But the problem is he's never gone beyond a certain point. So he's a typical liberal, progressive Democrat. Look how he was part of the Congressional Black Caucus. What deal did they make with President Obama to support the bailout of the banks? They sure got punked by President Obama. They got nothing out of it. And that hurts, the black population, but poor whites as well. 5 million people lost their homes in this recession because of the bank failures and the bank, just all the corruption and all the criminality that the banks were involved in. The Congressional Black Caucus, the Progressive Caucus, they did not a thing to stop it, to turn it around, to address it. Because the Democratic president, even though he was doing Republican things, was a Democrat. And that's where it stops. You can't go, there's a ceiling. You just don't buck the president when he's a Democrat.
Right. And I think that really goes to the crux of it, is that liberal Democrats aren't capable of thinking outside the box of a very constrained market capitalism economic system.
Well, I don't think they know they're in a box.
Right.
That's the point.
Right. So if we're to look kind of at the war economy specifically, and knowing that Israel is the largest recipient of U.S. military aid and U.S. non-military aid, but specifically military aid, Margaret, how does the military economy and the war economy function in Maryland especially?
Well, you see that, a lot of the jobs that are brought into Maryland are, military industrial. We've got, Booz Allen Hamilton is big here, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, in Towson now, I drive up York Avenue and there's a huge General Dynamics building staring us in the face. So these are the kinds of jobs that are being brought into Maryland. We see Fort Detrick, which is, in violation of the Biological Weapons Treaty, is creating biological weapons, and people out there are very concerned about the health impacts of what's going on at Fort Detrick in their community. So one of the projects that we have as part of Popular Resistance, and actually it started before Popular Resistance, is something called It's Our Economy, because there is, just as there was a feudal economy and out of that capitalism grew, right now in our capitalist economy there's a new type of economy growing, a solidarity economy or economic democracy. And so to me that's very exciting, and those are the kinds of projects that we need to be bringing to Maryland. So these are projects that instead of bringing in corporations which extract the wealth from our communities, allow communities to create their own businesses in a cooperative manner, and so that wealth is recirculated and grows within that community. This is being done all over the world. We can do it here. There's lots of different pieces to it that I won't get into, but it's really about, just like we have to end, extreme energy extraction to deal with the climate crisis, we have to end the extreme wealth extraction that happens in communities.
Right, and I think especially in Maryland, there's this false one choice, just like we have one choice in Baltimore with the Democratic Party. They say, well, this is a job, so you can't critique the industry that it's a part of, whether it's Walmart paying people sub living wages, or whether it's the military economy. And I think if you probe that at all, especially taking the example in southern Maryland of the proposed wind farm, and the way that Democratic Whip Steny Hoyer literally shot down this amazing project that progressives across the state have been pushing for, because there was the potential that it could interfere with the air base. And so it's not like the military jobs are here and there's no alternatives. It's because the military jobs are here, we're not actively pursuing the alternatives.
Right. I mean, look at these surveillance blimps that the Pentagon didn't want them, and Barbara Mikulski found $2.9 billion to fund them. They don't even work, and then we had the whole fiasco of one escaping and downing power lines across Pennsylvania. It's really, when you think about it, it's really pretty ludicrous. I mean, there are solutions. The majority of people favor these solutions, and we really don't see people in Congress at all who represent the interests or needs of the people in our state or in our country.
Every congressional district in the country has some military components.
Right.
So that's a lot of jobs they see. That's a lot of money coming into the district for that end. So it's very hard for them to buck that system. They're beholden to the Raytheons, the Boeings, and even the shirt makers who make the uniforms. They're in every part of the country, and it's a stranglehold on Congress.
And it's not
willingly too. In many ways.
Exactly, and it's not just about lobbying of these powerful corporations, but you can also see that the Department of Defense actually lends staffers to members of Congress that they don't have to pay for out of their staff budget, and so the people making the decisions in congressional foreign policy are the same people waging the war in the executive branch, and it really just all blends in together. I want to also kind of talk again about this false choice that we have. In Miles's case, there probably will be no Democratic Party primary, or if there is, it'll be a complete,
Coronation.
But in your case, Margaret, there will be a Republican challenger, and he is a former counsel for the Congressional the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, and he's recommending really draconian measures on Syrian refugees. But then people say, oh, look at these two progressive Democrats that we have running against each other, and which of them is better on this issue or that issue? And would you kind of expand on how the choice between Republicans and Democrats isn't really a choice, and then the choice between Chris Van Hollen and Donna Edwards isn't really a choice?
And when you were talking earlier in the conversation about kind of Democrats at least saying that they support kind of a social safety net, what I've found in my experience, and I have actually spent quite a bit of time in Congress, spent a year and a half during the health reform process in there pretty much every day fighting for a single-payer healthcare system. the way we see it is that the Republicans are very open about, yes, we're just going to, slash the social safety net and bring in much more, these huge corporations, and we're going to attack these countries and destroy healthcare. The Democrats do the same thing, but they don't say they're doing it. So we say the Republicans stab you in the front, while the Democrats, stab you in the back.
Absolutely.
Really is what we're talking about. And so people vote and have voted for a long time out of a sense of fear, and it happens on both sides. You've got the Democrats are so afraid of a Republican winning the office, so we can't possibly stray from to a third party, and the Republicans are so afraid of those liberal crazy Democrats winning, and so people, instead of voting for what they want, they're constantly voting out of fear. And so what do they get? We just keep getting these terrible candidates who continue the same economic and foreign policies, and nothing is changing. And so while you look at, Van Hollen and Edwards, they have been very loyal to the Democratic Party machine. I mean, Van Hollen was a former head of the DCCC. He was the fundraiser. He's got incredible ties to Wall Street, and it shows in his campaign so far. He's raised, I think, like $5 million, way more than Donna Edwards has. But Donna has done the same thing, particularly during the healthcare fight. She ran for office on a platform supporting single-payer healthcare, and as soon as the health debate came, she ran away from it. But she, Steny Hoyer was throwing $10,000 plate breakfast for her, so she was, rewarded for towing the Democratic Party line. So I think what we've seen from both of them is just an unwillingness to really stand up and challenge what's going on. And the way that I look at it, there's so many crises that we face, and the economic crises. Now with 2014, the Census Bureau tells us that 51% of American workers made $30,000 or less a year. This is poverty. This is a trend that's happening, and it's going to worsen, especially if these international treaties like the TPP pass. The Obamacare law is, now we're seeing what we had suspected all along, is that it's creating kind of a monopoly of private insurance companies, and people are continuing to not be able to afford to get the health care that we need. If we look at the climate crisis, this is a huge one because this one has a ticking clock. We have to stop fossil fuel infrastructure right now and transition, and talk about the industries that are here in Maryland. What if we use those for creating green energy instead of weapons? So we need someone in there who's going to stand up and fight back for the things that we need as a society. So.
Yeah, and Margaret, when you mention this voting out of fear, I think part of that is both an economy and a politics of scarcity, and that's existed for a long time. In the last few years, they've started calling it austerity, which works just as well as far as I'm concerned. But I think that, again, is this false non-choice. There's not enough resources to go around, so we'll have to cut the programs that people don't like, and we always find money for guns and bombs.
Right.
But one place where there definitely is money that could be reallocated is the military aid that goes to Israel every year. Israel has one of the strongest militaries in the world, and really after the Iran peace deal, Iran nuclear disarmament deal went through, which, of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu was fighting on kind of an unprecedented level of a foreign official coming to Congress to try to undermine the commander-in-chief and the president. We also see that instead of the usual $3 billion allotment, because of the Iran deal, Netanyahu's come back and is demanding a very specific $5.2 billion, and so speak to that a little bit, Miles. And
well, also he, as he was just meeting with President Obama recently, he's now approving more settlements on Bedouin land. It's like the chutzpah. How can he stare in the face of the United States, who is giving him nearly everything that he asks for, and then goes ahead and either puts more houses, more settlements on stolen land, asks for more military aid. And remember, a lot of the military aid we see right here in Baltimore, the fact that a lot of our police forces in Baltimore and nationwide are trained by the same thugs in Israel that are brutalizing Palestinians on a day-by-day basis. So we see it here. It's in front of us so much.
And
Yeah.
Miles, in the same way that people in the U.S. say, oh, well, at least the Democrats do this and they're better than the Republicans, people, especially American Jews, make that same argument about Netanyahu. It's like, well, he's terrible. And once we get back, the liberal Zionists
Right.
in control in Israel, then...
Again, that is based on the lack of knowledge of their own history. The fact is, again, whether the Democrat or Republican promoting the same foreign policy or even economic policy, any Zionist in Israel is promoting ethnic cleansing and genocide, regardless of whether they are a liberal Labor Party or if they are Likud or any of the other extremes. And it's funny how Likud isn't even the extreme, at least now. So that is, it's still an educational matter. They need to see just what the real history is, and we have to see that. We have to recognize that. American Jewish people have to see where Israel is going. And also another thing is, I'll tell you something, if I can bring this up. I remember, I think it was in 1967. It had to have been around that time. I was a young kid. I asked my dad, if we were to go to war with Israel, who would we support? And without blinking an eye, he said the United States. And it took me a long time to figure out why did he say that. And that's because he did serve in World War II. He was pretty much a draft dodger, but he got in afterwards. And he was a patriot, to the American ideals. People today, if you ask probably a typical Jewish person, who would they support? I really would love to know what that answer would be. Because I think so many Jewish people now have this thing about Israel über alles, that above even their own personal American ideals. Mm-hmm. That's got to change. We have to educate, bring it back to the way people have seen. I don't believe in nationalities in that regard, but it's a point of view that people, I feel it's quite twisted to see Israel as the country. So what is your nationality? Are you an American? Are you Israeli? What if we went to war? Right. Which I hope never, but.
Right, but to speak to the kind of the resource question, if we brought those military dollars home, we could invest in our communities, we could create more affordable housing, we could build up our public schools to be higher quality schools, we could provide, municipal internet, low cost or free internet to everyone, which we should do. We actually are already spending enough in the United States to have a high-quality healthcare system. If we kicked the insurance industry out, we could create a whole, we have so many jobs that we need in this country, jobs that actually are positive for our people. So we have a serious mental health problem in this current country. We don't have enough mental health providers. We should have more of those. We need more social workers. We need more teachers. We need more health professionals. We need to reconfigure our whole energy system and our infrastructure. And so, if we put our resources into these things and creating local food systems, there's like so many wonderful things, positive things that we could be doing with those dollars, growing the solidarity economy. That is what we need to do. We need to bring them home and invest them in our needs here. Stop being, a bully in the world. Learn how to step back. In so many ways, I'm thinking, U.S., just step back. Just step back and let other people other countries have the ability to make decisions. And so these are the this is my approach and as a candidate and hopefully as a senator, to bring these voices and these solutions into that discussion.
And there's so much talent on the local level to bring community gardens to feed the school children. If every school had a garden or at least able to have access, look at the health effect that would create for the American population.
And behavior and school performance,
Right.
all of those things have been proven to improve when you have a healthy diet in the school.
Absolutely. And also just the tension that's in the schools due to testing. How many hundreds of millions of dollars is going to Pearson and other companies that are so heavily involved in the testing machine? You know how it is, how many they're getting every year from K to 12 a test every year, and often more than that. A third of a school year is spent in some form of testing. Most other countries may do it once a year or maybe once in a lifetime of a student, because they put their energy in the students, in the teachers, in the school itself. We don't. We have such wasted resources, from human resources and physical resources, that need to be redirected back to reviving an American economy and an American, a healthy American system.
Yeah, and I think that's an amazing set of solutions that we've heard, and very tangible solutions that have been proven on small scales, but also on national scales in other countries. And I think, at the beginning and middle of this conversation, we did a good job of weaving the past into the present, and talking about policies that have failed and what could work. But I really want to end with the urgency of now. We're in a really terrifying moment, and I don't mean to be hyperbolic, but both what's happening internationally, but also what's happening nationally, with the rise of Donald Trump and Ben Carson, and also Hillary Clinton for that matter. These are the front runners, Bernie Sanders notwithstanding, and then we have international situation, which is also terrifying. So what, besides voting green in 2016, what is one small step in either in a personal life or on a community level that can be taken to address the current moment that we're in?
Right, and even though I'm running as a candidate, I still feel that electoral politics is a small part of what we need to be doing right now. Right now, it's about building a popular movement, a movement of movements, and building up these alternative solutions. So people need to plug in, where their abilities are, where their hearts are, but they need to educate themselves about the issues. Get involved either trying to stop something in your community, if it's a power plant that's coming in, a trash incinerator, a school that's being closed, work on that, or work on building all these alternatives like the community gardens, like green energy, like cooperative businesses. As we build this movement of movements, we're going to start to shift the political winds in a positive direction, and so there's something that everyone can do.
There's not much more I can add to that. I agree. I do think, though, at times the electoral side does have more of a weight when we're in such a desperate situation now, only because we are offering an opportunity, we're offering a direction that's different, and a healthy direction that most people actually believe in. If you go by whatever the polls are, most people agree with the single payer. They agree with Medicare for all. They agree with infrastructure support. And I think as a Green candidates, the two of us and the others who are running on the local level, we can show that there is an opportunity. You don't have to vote out of fear. You vote out of your conscience. Don't play the lesser evil game. You're going to get evil, so vote for what you think is best for yourself, for your family, for your community.
Last question to both of you. How do folks get involved? What's your contact information with the campaign and with the other work that you're doing?
My webpage is hoenig2016.com.
And how do you spell that?
HOENIG 2016. And it's there's a link for volunteers and contributions.
And I'm Flowers for Senate, FOR, flowersforsenate.org, and our organization is popularresistance.org.
Well, thank you both so much.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
Okay, let's clean up.
Beautiful.